He found her curled in the hay, half-starved and fast asleep, like the land had claimed her before he ever could. He was a farmer, one missed payment from losing everything. She was a runaway with a last name that still echoed through the valley, and the deed to the property that bordered his, the same land his father once called home. She wasn't just a stranger. She was the key to everything he'd buried. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The door groaned open, metal dragging against warped wood, loud in the stillness of morning. Eli winced at the sound, hand still on the latch. He stepped inside the barn with a kind of caution that didn't come from fear, but from years of knowing how much could go wrong in a quiet place. The sun hadn't risen all the way yet, but enough light slipped through the slats to paint the dust in gold. He was halfway to the back wall when he heard it, just the faintest shift of hay. Not animal. Too careful. Too human. Eli stopped, listened. Another sound. A breath, maybe. The kind someone holds until they forget how not to. He looked up toward the loft, jaw tightening. A ladder missing its third rung led the way. He hadn't touched it in months, not since the last storm peeled part of the roof back like a cheap sticker. He climbed slowly, boots heavy against old wood. She was curled into herself, knees tucked to chest, a faded canvas bag hugged tight beneath her, hair a mess of dark knots, skin streaked with dirt and dried sweat. Barefoot. The soles of her feet were cracked. Her jeans were torn, not the fashionable kind, just worn down to the truth. She didn't move, not when he stepped closer, not when the hay shifted under his weight. Her eyes were open. She watched him like an animal would, coiled, wary, already planning the exit. But she didn't run. Eli crouched, resting his forearms on his knees, kept his voice low. "You hungry?" Silence. He nodded, more to himself than her. All right. He stood, climbed down, and left the barn door open behind him. Let her see daylight. Let her decide. Back at the house, he filled a bowl with the last of the oats, poured milk over it, and added a spoonful of honey he'd been saving, set it on the kitchen table, then waited. 10 minutes later, the screen door creaked. She didn't speak. Just stepped in slow, tracking dirt across the floor. Eli didn't stop her. He just pointed to the bowl. She sat, ate, like she hadn't in days, like she didn't know when she'd get the chance again. She didn't look at him as she ate, just hunched over the bowl with both hands wrapped around it, like warmth alone might anchor her to the moment. The oatmeal steamed in front of her, the honey glistening across the surface, soaking into the folds. She didn't use the spoon at first, just lifted the bowl to her mouth and drank it down, fast and greedy. Then she caught herself, set it back down, picked up the spoon like maybe manners still mattered. Eli didn't speak, didn't ask questions, just stood by the stove, arms crossed, watching the way her shoulders trembled after every bite. Not from fear, not from cold, from something heavier. She was young, maybe 16, maybe a year older. It was hard to tell beneath the grime and the sunburn tugging across her cheeks. Her clothes didn't fit right, too big in the sleeves, too tight at the shoulders like they'd been passed down from strangers who didn't care if they fit. She had that look in her eye, not wild, but wary, like someone who didn't know how to receive anything without bracing for the cost. Eli cleared his throat gently. "There's more if you want it." She didn't answer, didn't even nod, just scraped the spoon across the bottom of the bowl and brought it to her mouth again. He turned away. Not out of politeness, he knew better, just enough to give her space. Poured himself a cup of coffee that had been sitting on the burner since sunrise. It was bitter and lukewarm, but it gave his hand something to do. She glanced up once, quick, like she couldn't help it, like she wanted to know if he was watching her disappear the last of his pantry. He caught it, didn't call her on it. "You're safe here," he said, low and even. Not a promise, just a fact. The kind you say because you want it to be true. She looked at the bowl. Then at him. Still no name, still no thanks. But she didn't run. That, he figured, was something. The fields looked peaceful from a distance. Rows of half-turned soil, patches of wild grass creeping back in where the work had gone unfinished. But Eli knew better, knew the lines weren't just in the dirt. They ran through memory, deeper than any plow blade could cut. 3 fences divided his land from the one next door, none of them straight. The first was wood, gray and slumped, sagging like it was tired of keeping history in place. The second was barbed wire, strung too high, tightened too tight by someone who thought distance could hold back resentment. The third wasn't a fence at all, just a row of stones his grandfather had laid by hand long before the deeds changed names. The map still showed it, even now, his acreage butting up against the empty parcel once called Landon Grove. Same lines, same corners. But everything else had shifted. His family had owned both, once. Back when his father's hands were still strong and his mother's voice still sang at dinner, Eli had ridden a 4-wheeler across those fields like the whole world was theirs. But droughts don't care about ownership and banks don't care about memories. When the loan fell through and the bill stacked too high, half the land vanished overnight in paperwork and polite foreclosure notices. The Landons bought it cheap. City family with just enough money to make noise and not enough care to keep the land breathing. They built a gate that never got finished, installed floodlights that died before the first winter. By the second year, the house sat empty. And by the 5th, nature had started taking it all back. No one had touched the place in nearly a decade. But Eli still walked the perimeter some nights, just out of habit. Stopped at the corner post, stared at the horizon where the barn roof still peeked over the trees, rusted and slouched. The line between fields never really disappeared, even when no one lived on the other side, even when the land stopped answering to names. The barn was quiet when Eli stepped out that morning, just past sunrise, the sky a soft wash of gold and blue. Dew still clung to the grass, soaking through the cuffs of his jeans as he made his way toward the east field. He noticed it right away. The canvas bag that had been tucked in the corner of the loft was gone. So was she. He didn't panic, not at first. He just stood there for a minute, one hand on the railing of the porch, eyes scanning the road that cut through the valley like a scar. No movement, no dust trail, just the hush that follows someone leaving without saying goodbye. Eli went about the morning like usual, mucking the stalls, checking the irrigation lines, but there was a pressure in his chest that wouldn't shake loose, a knowing. The kind that crept in low and sharp when something in your life quietly disappeared. By noon, the sun had burned off the last of the haze. He was wiping his hands on a rag when he saw her, coming up the path from the south edge of the field, bag over one shoulder, head down. Slow. Like every step back was heavier than the ones that took her away. No car, no stranger giving her a lift. Just dirt-caked soles and the look of someone who thought she was ready to go and realized too late she wasn't. She didn't say anything when she reached him, didn't explain, just dropped her bag by the barn door and stood there, hair tangled, eyes unreadable. Eli didn't ask where she went. He just handed her a clean glass of water, nodded toward the porch like it had always been hers to come back to. She sat, drank, and for the first time let her shoulders rest against the back of the chair like she might stay a while. She didn't run, and that, more than any name she hadn't given, more than any story she still hadn't told, said everything. Eli never said she could stay, not out loud, and she never asked. But after she came back, after she dropped her bag by the barn and sat on the porch like it was the only place left that didn't demand anything, something unspoken passed between them. Not trust, at least not yet, just recognition. The kind that settles into a place like dust when no one sweeps it away. That night he didn't lock the barn. She didn't leave. In the morning she was already outside when he walked up, leaning against the fence post with a mug of water, watching the sun rise like it was a movie she'd never seen all the way through. Her face was still guarded, but her body wasn't. She stood like someone who'd decided, for today at least, that this was where she needed to be. He handed her half a biscuit left over from breakfast. She took it, ate slow, no words exchanged. The next day she helped feed the chickens. No instruction, just observation and motion. She moved like she was used to learning that way, silently, watching others, picking up the pieces no one noticed were missing. By the fourth day, she'd swept out the hayloft without being asked. He saw her up there from the field, hair tied back with a piece of string, sleeves rolled high. It was cleaner than it had been in years. He didn't comment, just left an extra blanket by the barn door that night and kept walking. By the seventh day, she was helping with the irrigation system, sleeves soaked, hands steady. When a pipe cracked under pressure and water sprayed cold across her chest, she laughed, sharp and sudden, like it startled her, like maybe she hadn't remembered how. Eli looked up from the valve he was tightening, caught the sound, didn't say anything, but that night he left a jar of peanut butter and a stack of old National Geographics beside her blanket in the loft. Still no questions, still no answers. But the barn light stayed on a little later, and so did she. It was a Wednesday, cloudless, hot enough to turn the dirt brittle underfoot. Eli was out back fixing a busted fence post that had been leaning for 2 years too long when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Not fast, not hesitant, just official. He wiped his hands on his jeans and stood as the cruiser rolled into the drive, dust curling around its tires. The sheriff stepped out, one boot at a time, hat in hand, sunglasses reflecting the sun like armor. Not the kind of man who liked gossip, but one who listened when it came calling. Eli met him halfway, already bracing. "Morning, Sheriff." "Eli." The man nodded, glancing once at the barn. "Got a few calls. Folks down at Pete's said they saw someone hanging around your place. Young, not from here." Eli didn't flinch. "I've had help come and go. You know how it is. Can't run this place solo forever." The sheriff tilted his head slow. "That so?" "She works hard," Eli added. "Keeps to herself. Eats what I feed her and doesn't take more than she gives back." "That's not what I asked." Eli folded his arms across his chest. "What are you asking?" The sheriff took a breath. "There's a report out of Jasper, missing girl, 16, last seen hitching toward this side of the county line." Behind them, a shadow moved past the loft window. Quick, quiet. "She hasn't told me much," Eli said, "and I haven't asked." "Not even her name?" Eli paused, just long enough to be noticed, then shook his head. "Doesn't change the fact she's not causing trouble. She's not a problem." "That's not your call to make," the sheriff said, but his voice had softened. "If it is her, Eli, there's paperwork. Family. People who might be looking." Eli met his gaze. "Or people she's running from." The sheriff sighed, glanced once more at the barn, then back at Eli. "You see anything, hear anything, you let me know." Eli nodded. "Always." He waited until the cruiser turned back down the drive, tires kicking up silence behind them. Then he went to the barn, opened the door slow. She was already standing there. He didn't ask if she'd heard. He just said, "You're still safe." And meant it. It was an accident. He wasn't looking for it, not really. He'd gone up to the loft to drop off a new blanket. Cooler nights were creeping in earlier this year, and the thin one she'd been using wasn't going to cut it much longer. She wasn't there, just the faint smell of hay and old denim and the faintest dent in the blanket from where she'd last slept. Her bag sat open, not dumped out, just unzipped enough for something to slip out. He reached to tuck it back in, habit, not snooping, but his fingers caught the edge of plastic. He pulled it free. A worn ID, state-issued, cracked down the middle like it had been bent too many times in too many pockets. The photo showed her younger, but not by much. Still the same sharpness in the eyes, still the same guarded tilt to the mouth. But it wasn't the face that stopped him. It was the name, Willa Landon. His breath caught like he'd been punched somewhere deep in the ribs. He sank down slowly, lowering himself to the edge of the hayloft, the ID still in his hand. The barn around him felt suddenly smaller, thicker, like the air had been pulled out of the walls. Landon. He hadn't heard that name in years, and still, it felt like fire. The Landons had bought the neighboring land after the bank carved it from his family's hands like a limb they couldn't afford to keep. They'd come in clean and sharp, lawyers before boots, and paid pennies on the dollar. Never cared about the crops or the legacy, just the tax write-off and the view. His father had died 5 years later, heart worn down by the slow rot of loss. And now here she was, sleeping in his loft, eating his food, working his soil. A Landon. He sat there for a long time staring at the name, remembering his father's voice the day they signed the land away. They're not farmers, they're papermen. Eli closed his eyes. When he opened them again, she was at the top of the ladder, watching him, waiting. And for once, she didn't look like she wanted to run. She didn't look surprised when she saw the ID in his hand. Just tired. Like she'd known this moment was coming, like it had followed her across counties and state lines, and finally found her sitting in the same hayloft she'd tried to disappear into. Eli didn't speak. He just looked at her, eyes flat, jaw set, waiting. Willa climbed the last rung of the ladder slow, sat across from him, legs tucked under, like she was bracing for something colder than the breeze slipping through the barn slats. "They're gone," she said. He didn't blink. "Your family?" She nodded. "All of them. Bank took what was left of the estate last spring. The accounts were empty before that. Lawyers scattered like rats on a sinking ship. My uncle drank himself into an early grave in Charleston. My mother's in a facility. Doesn't know what day it is. Probably doesn't remember I exist." Her voice didn't shake, but it was stripped raw, not dramatic, just the kind of plain that comes after too many retellings to too many strangers who didn't care. "I was in boarding school when everything fell apart. Nobody called. I read about it in the paper, saw my last name in black ink under the word foreclosure." She let out a brittle laugh. "That was the moment I stopped going by it." Eli looked back down at the ID, at the name that still had weight on his tongue, like soil pressed too deep on roots that never had a chance. "Why'd you come here?" he asked. She met his eyes then, steady. "Because this land is the only thing that was ever real, and the only thing left in my name." He didn't say anything for a long moment. Willa leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "You think I came to take it back? I didn't. I came because I didn't know where else to go, and I figured if I was going to fall apart, it might as well be on dirt that remembers something." She looked around the barn like it had been listening the whole time. "I'm not a Landon anymore," she said. But Eli wasn't sure that was hers to decide. It was late when she told him. The kind of late that settled heavy in the bones when the farm was quiet and the stars were sharp above the fields. Eli had finished locking up the tool shed, and Willa was sitting on the back step, arms around her knees, staring at the dark like it was asking something from her. He brought her a glass of water. Didn't say anything, just sat down beside her. "My name's Willa," she said, voice low. "Not that it matters." He didn't interrupt. "I spent the last 2 years bouncing between courtrooms and guardianship hearings. Every time I got placed somewhere, it felt like a decision someone else made 100 years ago, and I was just showing up late to the sentencing." She picked at a loose thread in her sleeve. "I didn't run to be free. I ran because I was tired of sitting in offices where people used my name like it was a number, where they kept calling everything temporary, like that was supposed to comfort me." Eli listened, didn't move. "One judge tried to tell me how lucky I was, how some kids never get land or inheritance or a chance to start over." Her voice hardened just a little. "What he didn't say was that the land came with 1,000 strings and none of them were mine to hold, that people were circling it like vultures, trying to decide what parts of my life they could monetize." She looked over at him then, eyes shadowed but clear. "So I left. Took the deed, the pack, a name I hadn't used in months, and just walked. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept heading toward the place that always sat on the edge of every conversation. The place my grandfather said we'd earned, but your family built. That last part landed between them like something sacred and hard. I didn't come to fix what they broke, she said. I came to bury it. Eli didn't offer forgiveness, didn't offer blame. He just sat beside her in the quiet and made space for the story she finally let breathe. She kept it folded between the lining and the bottom seam of her bag, wrapped in an old t-shirt so the corners wouldn't curl. Paper that had lived longer than some promises, creased so many times it was starting to split at the fold. Willa didn't take it out often, only when she had to remind herself that what she carried wasn't just memory, it was law. She sat cross-legged in the loft that night, the barn hushed around her, moonlight cutting soft through the cracks in the boards. The deed was in her lap, opened flat against a patch of clean cloth. Her name was there, printed in black ink beside the seal, Willa Irene Landon, heir, sole beneficiary. Parcel 2C, section line east, Landon Property Holdings. She stared at it the way someone might look at a wound that never quite healed. This land, hundreds of acres of broken fences and overgrown rows, crumbling barn siding and a well gone dry, it was hers, not by choice, not even by blood she believed in anymore, but by name, and names, in this part of the world, still held power. She'd heard the lawyer say it through a speakerphone 1 county over, the room too cold and too clean. It's all in your name now, Miss Landon, unless contested. Eli didn't know she still had it. He hadn't asked, and she hadn't offered, not yet. Not when every day she stayed, every weed she pulled, every gate she mended, felt more like a debt than a right. She didn't know what it meant to carry something that could change the future of someone who deserved it more. Someone who'd watched the soil turn to ash under someone else's signature. Someone who still worked the ground even when it stopped giving. She reached out, touched her finger to the signature line like it might speak. Her name was still there, but she didn't know who it belonged to anymore. The deed said it was hers. But the land didn't answer to ink. It answered to hands, and hers weren't the only ones on it anymore. Eli didn't speak for a long time, just leaned against the fence post with one boot pressed into the dirt, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug that had gone cold hours ago. The sun had dipped low, casting everything in gold and shadow. Willa stood a few paces away, arms crossed, like she already knew what was coming but needed to hear it anyway. The line between our farms wasn't always a line, he said finally, voice rough like gravel pulled from deep in the throat. There used to be no need for one. My grandfather and his brother split the land with a handshake, nothing written, nothing filed, just trust. Willa didn't interrupt. When my dad came back from the war, he took over this half, kept it running, season after season, with the same busted plow and 2 bad knees. We were never rich, but we had enough, until we didn't. He exhaled hard through his nose. Drought hit us 3 years in a row. My mom died. The bank stopped returning calls. That's when the Landons stepped in. She blinked, slow. My family? He nodded. They bought the debt, took the land on paper before we even realized what was happening. Deeds changed hands in a courthouse 2 counties over. My dad got a letter in the mail telling him to get off the only land he'd ever known. Eli swallowed, looked out over the field like it still carried the wound. Wasn't stolen with fire or fence cutters, wasn't taken in some courtroom fight. It was taken with signatures, with ink, with words we didn't have the money to argue. Willa's throat tightened. She didn't know what to say to that. What could be said to the man who had lost what she now held in a folded deed in her pack? My dad called it theft wrapped in politeness, Eli muttered. Said it was easier for them to sleep at night if it felt like business instead of betrayal. She looked at the dirt beneath their boots. And now it's mine. Eli nodded once, eyes hard but not cruel. Yeah. And it hung there between them, line on paper, blood in soil. Neither of them had drawn it, but now they both stood on it. The shovel bit into the soil with a satisfying crunch, the kind of sound that lived deep in the chest and settled behind the ribs. Willa didn't ask where to dig. She just watched Eli once, then followed. Her hands blistered early, but she didn't stop, didn't complain. She pressed her weight into each scoop like she owed the dirt something. By the end of the first morning, her palms were red and raw. She wrapped them in gauze strips from a half-used roll in the kitchen drawer and went back out without a word. Eli didn't say much either. He'd hand her a bucket or point to a trough that needed clearing, and she'd be gone before he finished the sentence. It wasn't about instruction. It was about rhythm. And somehow, without meaning to, she found it. She started showing up before sunrise, a mug of coffee balanced in both hands, the same fraying sweatshirt tucked over her knuckles. By the time Eli stepped outside, the barn doors were already open, the chickens fed, the dogs stretched and tail thumping, like they'd known her their whole lives. She fixed the garden gate one afternoon while Eli was still working the back field. He came home to find the hinge oiled, the latch straightened, the post reset. A small bag of seed potatoes sat by the porch tagged with a folded note. Thought we could use more roots around here. He didn't bring it up, but the next day he set out an extra pair of gloves by the back door, her size, clean. Willa took to the fields the way some people take to music, not perfectly, but with a hunger to understand. She learned the feel of a tool well used, the way the ground softened just before a storm, the silence that settled over the land when it was listening. She didn't fill the space with noise. She just moved through it like she'd always belonged. Not because she'd earned it, not because anyone told her she could, but because she was finally choosing to stay. And the land, scarred, stubborn, waiting, was starting to respond. The envelope came on a Wednesday, tucked in with the feed catalog and a coupon flyer no one ever used. It was thin, official, the kind of envelope that didn't come with questions, only consequences. Eli stood on the porch, thumbs stained from fence tar, boots caked in half-dry mud. He opened it slow, as if the paper might soften if he gave it time. It didn't. The letter inside was blunt. Final notice, 14 days, foreclosure proceedings imminent. He didn't swear, didn't crumple it or throw it or tear it in half. He just folded it again, tucked it into the back pocket of his jeans, and went inside like it hadn't carved something hollow in his chest. Willa saw it from the barn, saw the way his shoulders dropped just slightly, the quiet lean of a man trying not to look like he was bracing for collapse. Later, when he wasn't looking, she found the letter on the kitchen table, unfolded, like it had demanded to be read again and again until hope gave out. The words hit harder on paper, more final. She stood there a long time, reading them, rereading them, as if they might shift. They didn't. She stepped outside to find him in the shed, hands wrapped around the steering wheel of the old tractor that hadn't worked in 3 seasons. He wasn't trying to fix it, just sitting there, staring out through the dirt-smeared glass at a field that needed more than weather to save it. "I saw the letter," she said quietly. He didn't flinch, wasn't hiding it. "You're not fighting it either." He looked at her then, tired, not angry, just like someone who'd run out of angles. "I've been fighting since I was 15, he said. "Sometimes the ground doesn't give back." Willa stepped closer, her boots crunching the gravel between them. "Maybe it doesn't," she said, "but I do." He blinked, and for a moment, just one breath's worth of time, it felt like the storm hadn't won yet. Willa waited until the sun dropped low, until the fields turned the color of rust and ash and the sky pulled its quiet over the barn. Eli was at the workbench in the shed, tuning a chainsaw that hadn't seen fuel in a month. His back was to her, but he knew she was there. He always did. She held the deed in both hands, unfolded, unhidden. "I want to give it to you," she said. He didn't turn around. "You don't have to say anything, just take it. The land's in my name, but it's yours, always was. Everyone around here knows it." Still, no answer. "I read that letter again," she said, stepping closer. 14 days isn't long. You could take this to the bank tomorrow, show them the paperwork, refinance, delay, buy yourself enough time to catch a break. It could change everything. Finally, Eli set the wrench down, turned slowly. His eyes weren't angry, just sad in a way that sat behind his ribs like something permanent. "That deed is the last thing that's yours," he said, "and I won't take it." She stared at him. "It's not mine. Not really." "Yes, it is," he said. "It's your name on it. Your choice, your way out if you want it. I won't trade your freedom for mine." Her hands trembled just a little. "Why not?" "Because this place already took enough from your family and mine. I won't let it take you too." For a second, all she could do was breathe. The word stung in the way truth always does. "I'm not offering it to walk away," she whispered. "I'm offering it because I'm staying." Eli stepped forward, slowly, gently pushed the paper back toward her chest. "And I'm asking you to stay without giving anything else up." They stood there in the quiet shed, the crickets starting to hum outside, the night stretching around them like a decision. The deed stayed in her hands, and somehow that meant more than if he'd taken it. The first time Willa walked into town, nobody said her name, but they didn't need to. It was in the way the conversation shifted when she passed, the way backs stiffened, and eyes flicked from her boots to her face to the sidewalk behind her, as if expecting a camera crew or a lawyer to come trailing after her, as if the ghost of the land and name might spill over onto the pavement if they stood too close. She kept her head down, bought a pack of screws from the hardware store, nodded politely when the woman at the register scanned them with a smile too thin to be real. The receipt was handed to her like a question. By the time she made it back to the truck, she could feel it, the shape of it. Words passed like brush fire. Landon's girl, the one who ran. Back to take what's left, just like her family always did. She didn't say anything to Eli that night, just set the screws on the counter, washed her hands, and helped peel potatoes for dinner like nothing clung to her but dust. But he saw it. The next morning, it was worse. An old man at the feed store, leaning on a cracked cane and half a century of bitterness, nodded once as she walked past and said, just loud enough, "Land don't forget who carved it up." Someone laughed. Quiet, mean. She didn't flinch, just kept walking. Later, behind the barn, Eli found her splitting firewood with a fury that didn't match the weight of the axe. Her knuckles were raw, blisters trying to bloom. He didn't stop her, didn't tell her to rest. He just picked up another log, set it on the stump, and stood beside her while she swung. This town didn't forget, didn't forgive, not easily, not clean. But he did, and sometimes that was enough to keep her standing, even when everything else felt like it still wanted her gone. The fence was fine when the sun went down. Eli had checked it himself, walked the whole stretch along the south line, where the cattle grazed and the brush crept too close to the barbed wire. He'd made a mental note to fix the sagging post by the far gate, but it was holding, nothing urgent. By morning, 3 sections were down, wire sliced clean, posts kicked in at their base, boot prints in the soft earth. Not animal, not weather. This was deliberate. Sabotage. The cattle had scattered. 2 wandered into the dried creek bed, and one, his best heifer, stood limping near the ditch, her side scraped raw from a splintered post. Eli stood in the middle of the wreckage, fists clenched, jaw tight. Willa was already hauling wire from the shed by the time he said a word. "Leave it," he said, low and cold. "I'll fix it." She stopped mid-step. "You sure?" He nodded, turned away from her eyes, because the truth was sitting heavy in his chest, and he couldn't speak it yet. Someone didn't want her here, and they weren't going to hide it behind whispers anymore. By the time the sun crested over the barn roof, Eli had reset 1 post and restrung half the line. His hands bled from a slice on his thumb where the wire snapped wrong. He didn't notice until the blood dried sticky on his palm. Willa brought water, silent, watched him coil the wire with more force than needed. "This is my fault," he said finally, not looking at her. "No," she said. "It's theirs." He shook his head. I should have known better. Bringing you here, letting you stay. Her voice didn't waver. You didn't bring me. I walked. That stopped him, just long enough for the silence to grow sharp. You think if I left again, they'd stop? She asked. You think this land would forgive them for running me off the same way they ran your family out? He didn't answer. He just picked up the next post and set it deeper than before. The gate had been hanging crooked for years, the hinges rusted, and the latch held together with baling wire and stubbornness. But now it was worse. Snapped clean at the base, wood split like bone. Whoever had done it hadn't bothered to be subtle. Eli stood there that morning, measuring the damage in silence. The dew still clung to the grass, untouched by heat or sun, and the quiet felt heavier than usual. Willa came up behind him, toolbox in one hand, gloves already on. She didn't ask what to do, just crouched down beside the busted hinge and ran her fingers along the break. They used a pry bar, she muttered. Knew what they were doing. Eli said nothing, just set down the new post and started digging. They worked side by side, not rushing, not dragging, just moving in rhythm, the kind that comes when words aren't needed, when hurt can't be fixed but still demands a response. Willa held the frame steady while Eli hammered the first bolt in place. His swing was clean, precise, shoulders drawn tight with the weight of what it meant, not just a gate, not just a fence, but the line between standing your ground and walking away from it. You ever build one before? He asked, more to break the silence than anything. Watched it once, she said, from the porch, back when they paid other people to do the work. He glanced at her, a flicker of something in his eyes. Then he handed her the hammer. Try it. She did. The wood creaked as the pieces came together again, not perfect, but solid. They fitted the new latch, lined up the hinges, tested the swing. When it clicked into place, Willa stepped back, breathless in that quiet way people are when they've just put something broken back into the world whole. They'll probably hit it again, she said, wiping sweat from her brow. Then we'll fix it again, Eli replied. And this time, the gate stood straighter than it had in years. This time, it was built by hands that had something to prove. The clouds rolled in fast, low and mean, heavy with the kind of rain that doesn't just pass through. It settles, soaks, drowns if you let it. Eli stood at the edge of the field watching the sky darken like a bruise. The soy was too close to harvest to risk it. One hard rain, and half the crop would rot where it stood. They had 3 days, maybe less. He didn't say much, just hitched the old trailer to the back of the tractor and started moving, first row, then second. Hands raw from cutting, boots sinking with every step. The engine coughed once, caught, then settled into a reluctant rhythm. Like everything else on the farm, old but still fighting. Willa didn't wait to be told. She grabbed gloves, pulled her hair back, and dropped into the dirt beside him like she'd been born to it. She moved fast, efficient, quiet. That first night they worked until the headlights faded, until their bodies ached and their fingers went numb from gripping too tight. They didn't talk, just passed crates between them and breathed like they were trying to keep pace with the land. By morning the sky had turned to steel. The air was thick with the promise of a storm, and Eli could feel it in his knees. He didn't stop, couldn't. Willa didn't leave his side, not when the wind kicked up, not when the first drop hit her cheek, not even when Eli told her to go rest, just for an hour, just to eat something warm. "I'm not done," she said, wiping her face with a dirt-streaked sleeve. "You don't have to prove anything," he muttered, bending to lift another crate. "I'm not trying to," she said. "I just don't want to lose it, not this time." He looked at her then, really looked. She was soaked, blistered, exhausted, but still standing, still here. And in that moment, under a sky that threatened to take everything back, he knew. She wasn't just helping him save the farm, she was helping him save what was left of himself. The paperwork lay flat on the kitchen table, corners pinned by a mug, a half-empty salt shaker, and Eli's calloused hand. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that only came after days of back-breaking work, and a harvest won with sweat instead of certainty. Willa stood across from him, arms crossed over her chest, face unreadable. Her hair was still damp from the rain that had finally come, just hours after they'd cleared the last row. The field hadn't drowned. They'd beaten it this time. "I had it notarized in town," she said, nodding toward the single-page transfer form. 1 acre, South Field. It's yours again. Eli didn't move. "You're listed on title now," she added. "Fully. They can't touch it." He stared at the page like it was a trap, like the weight of it might shift and crush something if he breathed wrong. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice rough. "Because it always should have been," she said, "and because you gave me a place before you knew who I was, before you had a reason to." 1 acre won't save this place." "No," she said, softer now, "but it's a start." He leaned back in the chair, the wood groaning beneath him. The room smelled like rain-soaked flannel and leftover coffee. The paper between them felt like more than a gift. It felt like a line being drawn, not in soil or blood, but in trust. Eli picked up the pen. "You sure about this?" She nodded. "It's not charity." "No," he said, signing his name slowly, deliberately. "It's a promise." He set the pen down, looked up at her. "I'll take care of it." "I know." They didn't hug, didn't shake hands. She just pulled out 2 mugs, poured them both coffee, and sat across from him like she belonged there. 1 acre, legally his. But what passed between them in that moment, that belonged to both of them. The land wasn't whole, but the history didn't own them anymore. And that 1 field? It was proof that something lost could be given back. Not with revenge, with choice. Eli set the folder down on the table, like it was heavier than it looked. The morning light slanted through the kitchen window, catching the edge of the paper, turning the legal ink into something almost sacred. Outside, the field steamed with leftover rain, and the sound of the windmill turning slow filled the silence between them. Willa stood by the doorway, one hand gripping the back of a chair, eyes flicking to the folder but not moving closer. She wasn't the girl he found in the barn anymore, not in the way she held herself, not in the way she waited for him to speak. He opened the folder and turned it toward her. The top page was a deed transfer. His land, every inch of it still in his name, now shared. Co-ownership. Her name printed beneath his, in clean block letters that hadn't existed there before. "I had it drawn up yesterday," he said. "Took it into town. Signed most of it already. Just need you on the last line." She stared at it. "Why?" "Because this place didn't come back to life until you stepped into it," he said. "Because when you showed up, I was halfway to letting the ground win." "That doesn't mean—" He raised a hand, not to silence her, but to steady the truth. "I'm not giving it to you. I'm asking you to share it. 1 acre for 1 acre, 1 name for 1 name." Her voice was thin when she finally asked, "What if I mess it up?" He smiled, not wide, just enough. "Then I'll fix it." "And if you do?" "Then you will?" She didn't speak, just moved to the table and picked up the pen. Her hand trembled, but she signed. When it was done, Eli leaned back in his chair and said, "If one of us falls—" She finished it, quiet, certain. "The other holds the ground." And in the stillness that followed, something deeper than roots took hold, not inheritance. Belonging, chosen, by paper, by promise, by hand. He pulled up in a rented car that looked too clean for the gravel road, tires crunching like it resented the dust. Eli spotted him from the porch, button-down shirt, polished shoes, and a briefcase he carried like a weapon. Not a local. That was clear from the second the car door opened. Willa was in the barn, sleeves rolled, elbow deep in feed. She didn't see him coming. The man took his time walking up the path, sunglasses still on, the kind of smug calm only someone with papers in their hand and nothing to lose could afford. "Mr. Carter," he said, nodding as if they'd met before, "I'm looking for Willa Landon." Eli didn't move from the porch. "She's not taking visitors." I'm not a visitor. I'm family. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded letter. My name's Charles Langston. My grandfather was Arthur Landon's brother. Makes me next in line, technically, in the event of an unfit heir. Eli's face didn't change, but his shoulders tensed. Langston continued. I represent a motion to dispute Willa's claim to the Landon estate on grounds of abandonment, instability, and, frankly, questionable associations. His eyes flicked toward the barn. A girl like that doesn't run unless she's hiding something. She's not hiding, Eli said. She's working, living, standing her ground. Langston shrugged. Be that as it may, a judge might see things differently. Willa stepped out then, wiping her hands on her jeans, breath already sharp in her chest. What do you want? Langston turned to her, smile like a blade. Just what's fair. The land. The deed. It was never yours, not really. You're just a name on a line. I'm here to make sure the name means something again. Willa looked at Eli, then back at the man who'd appeared like a ghost she never knew she had. I'm not giving it up, she said. Langston handed her the letter anyway. Then I guess we'll see you in court. When he left, the dust rose behind his car like smoke. Willa didn't speak. She just held the letter tight, hands steady this time. She wasn't running. Not anymore. The courthouse sat like an old scar in the middle of town, cleaned up over the years, but still holding everything it had ever witnessed in its bones. Willa stood on the steps beside Eli, hair pulled back tight, papers clutched to her chest like armor. She wore jeans, a button-down shirt, and boots that still carried the dust from the field. She hadn't dressed up. She hadn't wanted to pretend. Eli hadn't said much on the drive-in, just handed her a folder full of proof, work logs, tax forms, signed deeds, photos, one from the day she rebuilt the south fence with splinters in her hands and a sunburn on her neck. She didn't smile in it, but she was real. Inside, the bench creaked when they sat. The air smelled like paper and old varnish. People turned when they entered, some familiar, some not, but all of them watching, judging, remembering the name stitched across generations of boundary lines and bitter auctions. Charles Langston sat 2 rows ahead, his lawyer whispering something over a glossy file. Willa didn't flinch. The judge entered, older than the building it seemed, with a face carved by years of small-town disputes and family dramas turned legal. He looked over the file slowly, then over the room. The case wasn't long. Langston's lawyer argued technicalities, inheritance laws, family chains, character questions spun from a past Willa never had a chance to explain. Unstable, he said at one point, like it was a fact instead of an accusation. Eli stood next. He didn't use the folder. He just told the truth. She's been here. She's worked this land, fed it, fought for it. You want proof of ownership? Look at the fields. Willa followed. Her voice was clear, no trembling. I didn't come back for what they left. I came back for what they forgot. This land isn't just paper. It's the only place that ever let me stay. When they left the courthouse, the sun was already beginning to fall. No one said anything on the steps. But a few of those watching, some of the same who once whispered, nodded as they passed. And that silence? It wasn't judgment anymore. It was respect. The letter arrived in a plain envelope, folded once, hand-delivered by the clerk with no ceremony and less eye contact. Eli met her on the porch, wiping his hands on a rag, sweat clinging to the back of his neck. Willa stood by the mailbox, staring at the seal. Her name was typed clean on the front. She didn't open it right away, just held it, paper soft from humidity and heavy in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't nerves. It was something deeper, like the moment you realize a door you've kept half closed is finally about to stay open. She walked up the steps, sat beside Eli in the shade, and peeled the flap slowly. 1 page. Simple language, the ruling in her favor. The claim denied, the inheritance affirmed, the land hers. She read it twice, the second time slower, like maybe the words would change if she gave them too much attention, but they didn't. The signature at the bottom was final. So was the date. "It's done," she said. Eli leaned back, exhaled through his nose. "Told you it would be." She didn't smile right away, just looked out at the field, the one they'd nearly lost to the rain, the one that gave up just enough to keep them both moving. "I thought it would feel bigger," she said, "like fireworks or something." "Sometimes it's just quiet," he said. "Doesn't mean it's small." She folded the letter and tucked it into her back pocket, not for safekeeping, for memory. "It's legal now," she murmured, "on paper." "It always was real," Eli replied, "but now the rest of the world knows it too." They didn't talk after that, didn't need to. The land stretched before them, dry in places, green in others, flawed like everything else worth fighting for. And though the ink on the letter said owner, the weight between them said something more. It said family. It said earned. It said, "We don't walk this alone anymore." The town square was dressed in bales and bunting, the kind of fall light that made everything look softer than it really was. Kids ran between booths with sticky fingers and straw in their hair, and the air smelled like roasted corn and wood smoke. The Harvest Festival had come around again. Same music, same vendors, same familiar faces grown slightly older. Eli hadn't shown up in years, not since the last bad season, not since the foreclosure notice that stole his father's smile, not since the town made it clear that they remembered everything, especially who lost what and who profited from it. But now he stood there, stiff in his shoulders, flannel tucked in clean, the brim of his hat shadowing eyes that scanned the crowd like he was waiting to be told to leave. Beside him, Willa kept her hands in her jacket pockets, boots scuffed from work, braids still damp from the morning's wash. She didn't cling to him, didn't hide. She stood shoulder to shoulder like she'd always been meant to take up that space. The whispers came. Of course they did. That's her. "The Landon girl. Did you hear what happened in court?" But no one stepped in front of them. Not when Eli reached for the caramel apples with a quiet thanks. Not when Willa handed a basket of sweet potatoes to the booth raffle with her name already written on the tag, W. Landon Carter. First time she'd signed it that way. Someone offered them cider. Someone else nodded just slightly. And when the music picked up and couples moved to the edge of the grass, swaying slow, Eli didn't walk away. He stood, watching. Willa nudged him, a smirk barely on her lips. "You dance?" "Not since I was 20. "Good," she said, stepping ahead of him. "Neither do I." They didn't join the dancers, just leaned against the fence, two silhouettes against the orange spill of twilight. Not guest and host, not stranger and shelter. Family, written not in blood, but in the harvest that fought to grow again. The sound of hammers filled the valley before the sun did. It started with a truck pulling up just after dawn. Pete from the feed store, a stack of 2x4s in the bed, and a thermos clutched in one hand. He didn't say much, just nodded at Eli and started unloading. Half an hour later, 2 more trucks followed, then another. By 9, the barn was surrounded. Nobody said who organized it. No one had to. Word travels differently in places like this. Not just through gossip or headlines, but through the spaces between silence, the kind that lingers after courtrooms and harvests and fall festivals, where people remember not just what was done, but who stayed to clean up. Willa stood by the edge of the field, hands in her jacket pockets, watching as men and women who once whispered her last name like it was a warning now carried boards up ladders, handed nails across sawhorses, shared tools without being asked. She blinked against the morning light, trying to believe it was real. Eli handed her a hammer. "Come on," he said. "You helped tear it down. You ought to help build it back." She smiled, soft and full. "You calling me destructive? I'm calling you necessary." They worked side by side, dust in their hair, paint under their nails, every creak of old timber replaced with the sharp snap of new wood. The rot pulled out by hand, the roof patched by 3 men who used to call Eli stubborn for not letting the place go. By mid-afternoon, the smell of fresh-cut lumber had taken over the air. The sun caught on the new tin roof like it was proud of what they'd done. And when the last nail was driven and the final plank stained, Willa stepped inside. The walls were the same shape, but everything else felt different. Brighter, stronger, safe. She ran a hand along one beam. It was hers now, not in title, not just in legacy, but in sweat, in scars, in the kind of belonging that's built, not inherited. The barn had stood for generations. Now it would stand for one more. The box was old, tucked deep in the back corner of the Landon farmhouse's office, one of the few rooms that hadn't collapsed under years of neglect and wind. Willa had come to clear it out, thinking there might be something salvageable. A photo, a ledger. Some trace of the lives lived here before the silence took over. She hadn't expected the letter. It was folded neatly inside a cracked leather folio, buried beneath property deeds and contracts stamped with the Landon seal. Yellowed edges. Ink faded, but still legible. Her grandfather's name was scrawled on the front in a rushed, uneven hand. To Arthur Landon, from Thomas Carter, Eli's father. Willa sat on the floor, legs crossed, fingers trembling as she unfolded the page. The handwriting was rough, slanted, the kind of script you learn young and never bother refining. A farmer's hand, a tired man's voice, bleeding through every line. Arthur, you'll get your lawyers to make this clean. I know that. You'll wrap it in contracts and signatures and say it's just business, but don't pretend you don't know what this is. You're taking it, not offering help, not giving grace, just taking what a man built with his hands, because you can. My boy's out back right now, mending the south fence with wire we can't afford. He still thinks we'll save it. He doesn't know the papers are already signed. You say it's nothing personal. But tell me, what is it when you smile in a man's kitchen and steal his soil the next week? I hope you live long enough to regret this. I hope your granddaughter, or your grandson, or whoever ends up standing on that land one day, remembers the theft written in ink. Because Eli will. And I pray he doesn't carry it like I did. Willa folded the letter slowly, pressing it flat between her palms like it might split apart if she didn't. When she returned to the rebuilt barn that night, she handed it to Eli without a word, and, for the first time, the weight between them wasn't only shared, it was understood. Eli held the brush steady, the bristles thick with black paint, as Willa peeled back the tape from the metal box. The old name, Carter, had been scrubbed clean earlier that morning, the rust sanded down, the surface primed. For a long time the box had stood like a lonely marker, just one name in fading script, guarding the edge of a property line that had divided more than just land. Now there were two. Willa Landon, Eli Carter. The letters were sharp, clean, hand-painted with the care of someone who didn't rush this kind of thing. Eli leaned back, wiped the sweat from his brow, and let the silence settle around them. They hadn't spoken much while they worked. The decision had already been made, long before deeds were signed, before courtrooms and weathered fences, before the barn had come down and risen again. It was in the way they woke at the same hour now, without setting alarms, the way they passed tools without asking, the way she no longer watched the horizon like she was waiting for something to chase her back into it. Willa stepped back, arms crossed, squinting at the box like it might move. "I thought it would feel strange," she said, "seeing my name next to yours." "And?" Eli asked, voice soft. She smiled, barely. "Feels right." Behind them the house creaked as the afternoon wind slipped through the porch rails. The barn doors were open, tools neatly lined, fresh hay stacked where rot used to live. No fences now between what was his and what was hers. Just rows of earth, dark and waiting. "I guess this is it," she said, running her hand across the top of the mailbox. "No going back." Eli looked at the road, at the long stretch of gravel that had once carried her to him in silence. "No need to." She nodded. "One farm." He glanced at her. "One future." She didn't say anything after that. She didn't need to. The names said enough. The first seeds went into the ground just after sunrise. The earth was soft, thawed clean by weeks of slow rain and warmer days, rich enough to make you believe in something again. Eli knelt in the dirt, fingers coated in mud, the same calloused hands that once buried more than just crops into the soil. Now they worked steady, careful, measured. Beside him, Willa pressed a row of pea shoots into the trench, her nails caked, hair pulled back with a bandana faded from too many washings. She didn't speak, didn't hum, didn't fill the space with noise. She just worked, like the silence itself was a kind of prayer, like she understood what it meant to put something into the ground and trust it would rise. The land had changed, not in shape, not in yield. It still resisted, still made them earn every inch. But it no longer belonged to ghosts, no longer lived in the tension of what had been lost and what had been taken. It breathed easier now, like it had waited for them to figure it out. Willa paused and leaned back on her heels, wiping her forehead with the back of her arm. She glanced at Eli, squinting into the early light. "We missed a patch." He followed her gaze and nodded. "Then let's fix it." And they did, side by side, boots digging into the same furrowed soil where once a fence had drawn its hard line between them. There were no signs to mark the history anymore, no visible reminders of deeds contested or names that had once tasted bitter in the mouth. Just two people planting in rhythm, trusting the earth to hold what they offered. It wasn't perfect. The past still lived in stories told over late dinners and the occasional look that lingered a second too long when a tractor stalled or a shadow moved through the tree line. But spring had come again, and this time it had brought with it more than a change in weather. It had brought roots, quiet, stubborn, and real. And that, more than anything else, was worth harvesting.